Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our next webinar as part of the Chamber series, Storytelling for Business. And I hope you're all well wherever you are. I'd like to start the session today by first of all acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we all respectively meet, the Wadawurrung people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I do welcome you all. It's very interesting times we're living through at the moment, and we're all just reaching out for those little glimmers of hope and a little bit of good news, hopefully tomorrow. But certainly I think we've still got a bit of heavy lifting to do as we move through this pandemic and deal with the restrictions. Unfortunately, I certainly at the Chamber, we're in really good conversation with the government pushing for regional roadmaps and a bit more clarity for businesses, which I think is the hardest thing. But there's a lot of stakeholders involved in that conversation. So it's a noisy environment. We're pushing hard to try and get what we can, but it's a very tricky situation. Today, though, we're talking about a more interesting topic than pandemics and disruptions. Today, we're talking about storytelling and creating narratives for business. And it certainly feels like it's struck a chord with our participants, with about 100 people registered today. So welcome to you all. I'd like to welcome our guest speakers in no apparent order. Abby Jane, who's the lead copywriter and brand strategist at Pixel. Welcome, Abby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Michelle Hogan, brand counsel at Michelle Hogan, aptly named. Welcome, Michelle.
Hey, everyone.
Jurgen Strauss, our good man, who is the podcast and marketing specialist at InnovaBiz. Welcome, Jurgen.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here, and hello, everyone.
I'd also like to acknowledge all of our corporate partners, especially the Chamber's platinum partner, Pixel, who, Abby, you know very well, as well as all of our gold and silver partners, executive partners, and our very special online sponsor this month, Home Instead, who provides aged care services and keep the elderly in their home right across Geelong. I'd invite all of our participants to use the Q&A function. We love questions as we get going, and to get involved. We've got 30 minutes and we will keep it to that. We usually never run out of time. So let's get started. Abby.
Yes.
I've got you online. So storytelling. So how important do you think storytelling is for brand building in businesses?
Super important. Stories are really powerful communication vehicles because they tap into the patterns in our minds that are primed to receive and recall information. So a good example is at school, we were all taught how to do algebra or long division. We were also taught the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Now, unless you've gone on to do a degree in pure mathematics or you've become a rocket scientist, you probably don't remember how to do a lot of those mathematics, but you most definitely remember Little Red Riding Hood, because when information is presented to you in story form, you're more likely to remember it. You're actually 22 times more likely to recall information when it's presented through story versus just presenting information. So that's why it's critical for brands to do that, because that is how they get remembered and that is how their stories get shared. And that's what you want. You want the sharing because you want to build new audiences.
Now, obviously, wolves dressed up in Granny's night garments is something that makes them memorable. But what's another reason, and what are some of the things that go into great stories?
So great stories, uniqueness, creativity, and something that we're seeing more today is humanity. Consumers, thankfully, with the invention of the internet, they're a lot more savvy, and brands need to be a lot more transparent and not be something that they aren't. So they need to be original and true to themselves, and customers appreciate that transparency because this is also where you get to show the human side of your brand. So in a digital consumer world, visible humanity, it has a premium value because even the least savvy customers can spot fakers or posers. You also need to have fun with creativity. If you think back to the ads that you remember most, the ads that you love, there's always some sort of brilliant creativity behind them, whether it's a particular character, whether it's a particular jingle. There's always a way to make even the most boring subject matter or product or service interesting if it has value in a person's life. So my advice to make good stories is to have a bit of fun. Get out your creative drive, and to be creative for stories that resonate and stories people notice.
Thank you, Abby. I'm interested in coming back to that, but in the meantime, you did touch on brand there, and that's an important part of storytelling. So, Michelle, how do you think stories connect all of the other brand assets and bring a brand to life?
Yeah, I take a little bit of a different view of brand than lots of people do, right? So I don't think of assets of brands as having assets. So brands, pretty much the way I look at it, is a result of the promises you keep. So the assets that you're talking about, I think logos and taglines and marketing campaigns and all that stuff, those are markers. They're how people pick you out of a lineup. And yeah, it's really important that the things that connect that together are consistent and that people can recognize them, and that it's, as Abby was talking about, that they're genuine, right? So, because otherwise you're going to make it really hard for yourself. If you're actually putting stuff out there, if you're telling stories or giving messages, communicating into your different audiences, to customers, and even internally to your employees about stuff that's not real, that you can't do, that sets expectations you can't meet, and that's a one-way doom loop, right, to pain and suffering for your organization. And the result of that is a brand that erodes, right? So if you want your brand to continue to accumulate value, and that value is really important that you build through all of these efforts, because you can take that then, and that helps your enterprise, helps your organization to do more work, right? I can get, if I have a brand that's kind of strong, that's robust, that people think good things about, that has a lot of really positive capital, that helps me get more customers with less cost. It helps me keep customers that I have. It helps me keep employees. And then that means that other value that I have, other money that I have, I can use for R&D and things rather than having to spend it to get customers. So this stuff all connects up together, right? So stories are if you like, are an engine. They're an engine that drive that, which is so important. It helps make visible what you care about.
Yeah. Now, brand building can seem like hard work. Let's be honest, it's a lot of heavy lifting, and it does come down to all of your interactions with your customers and the people around you, as well as storytelling. So given how difficult brand building is perceived, Michelle, how well do you think businesses embrace storytelling for brand building?
I think by and large at the moment, I see a lot of very transactional approach to using stories, right? So they're seen as a means to an end. And the problem with that is it devalues them. It really undervalues them rather than devalues them. Because if you think about historically and just through human history, right? Stories are how we connect. They're how we see what each other cares about. And so when you just use that transactionally, when you just see it as a way to, score some points, get some customers, you're really doing a disservice to the true value that storytelling can have, both internally and externally.
Now, Jürgen, for a man who's at the top of his game in terms of podcasting, after many years in marketing, you're now pretty much committed to a podcasting career. For me, I find podcasts to be the most authentic storytelling channel, really, to sit down for 45 minutes and listen to someone really, tell the truth and be candid. Is that how you find podcasts to be?
Yes, I agree with you. I think a good podcast where there's an authentic, we've heard both Abby and Michelle talk about authenticity and humanity, where there's an authentic conversation between two people that brings out some stories. Those people share some stories in that conversation, because if we're having a conversation with friends, we usually share stories and memorable stories, and they're not transactional stories like Michelle said, one of the traps that people fall into. They're actually authentic stories, they're memorable stories. And I think a podcast done well, a podcast conversation done well, can really bring that out and bring that authenticity, that memorable story. And it's not just about, for example, if I'm talking about my brand, it's not necessarily my story, it's my customer's story. It's what, the idea of the brand promise. It's what people say about me outside when I'm not there. That's really what my brand is. And if I can tell stories about my customers, about the results they've achieved as a result of starting a podcast, as a result of getting on podcasts as guests, then those stories and in a way that's memorable, those stories are much more powerful than any story about me and my history or my brand. So I think there's the authenticity and the how you share that in a podcast that makes podcasting a really good medium for having that storytelling component.
And with podcasting, you've been doing it for a number of years. Have you seen it explode? Is that the way it's going?
It has exploded. It's grown dramatically since about 2014. And I was looking at some numbers the other day. It's almost a hockey stick type trajectory at the moment. Now, a lot of people say, is it too late to get into podcasting? And the answer to that is definitely no, because I checked up just before we came on here. 2 years ago, there were 500,000 active podcasts in the world. Now think about that. There's millions and millions and millions of podcasts. There's billions of blog posts out there and social media posts. And yet, we spend a lot of time blogging and going on social media posts. So we're comfortable about doing that, competing against all these ones. There are millions and millions of podcasts, but only about 500,000 to 1 million that are active, that are actually regularly publishing and that are being seen in the podcast search engines. So it's a really good time to get in there and be consistent about it and use them to share stories.
And ladies and gentlemen listening, if you're ever interested in a good podcast series, Thriving Geelong People with Purpose, the Chamber podcast, managed by our good man Jurgen as well. Now, Jurgen, I'll get back to Abby and Michelle shortly, but I am interested. Something like a podcast, is that something a small business can just jump on and get started?
Absolutely. What I suggest, if somebody hasn't done it before and they're curious about how it works, the easiest way to test it out and see whether it's something they like to do is to find podcasts that talk about their area of expertise and that have an audience that they could get in front and they could add value to. Connect with that host, start a conversation with that host, and see if you can get on their podcast as a guest and have that really good conversation. That way, the podcast host has all the post-production work. You just turn up like we're doing here, the three of us, to have a conversation, and then at the end of it, you've got all the work. Your team has all the work to edit and produce and share this, although we'll obviously share it on social media. Yep. But this way, you can test it out, see whether podcasting is something you enjoy. And if it is, then keep repeating that, getting on podcasts as a guest, but then look at the next step of setting up your own.
Very good. Now, I'll go to Abby now, but Jurgen, just while I go to Abby, if you don't mind checking your audio, it's a bit scratchy, just the sound there, and I'll come back to you. So, Abby, away from podcasts, because there's a lot of different channels we can use for telling stories, Yep. What are some of the channels that people are using beyond podcasts? And I suppose a separate question is, how important is it to emotionally connect with your customers through that storytelling?
So I'm glad Jurgen brought up podcasts. That's actually, that's part of where the future of brand storytelling is. You've got people now who are listening to the news through their AirPods rather than actually watching it on the television. So in terms of advertising and where that's heading, we will be potentially seeing more audio advertising, and that's on-demand advertising, audio advertising. So through podcasts, that sort of thing, it's definitely something brands should be thinking about. In terms of the kinds of channels where stories are best distributed, as a business owner, the person that can answer that best is you, because you know who your target customers are, you know where they're hanging out, you know where they're digesting information, and that will largely come down to how old they are and what kind of platforms they are using. So essentially a younger demographic you might look to Instagram or streaming or TikTok, older demographics, Facebook and email. So you want to find out where they're digesting their content, how they're digesting it, and making sure you are talking to them in that space, essentially. So that's where your stories are best distributed, is where your target market is looking for those stories, or going to be looking for that information. And the reason it's important to emotionally connect with those consumers when you get there is because this is where the psychology of marketing starts to apply. So we all like to think we make very rational decisions with our wallets and our spending, but we don't. Our emotional drivers are huge. Our emotions do tend to control us, and they are the primary driver behind most of our purchases. So when we make an emotional connection with our audiences, we are building a brand affinity. Affinity builds trust. And when you put that in terms of a marketing definition, that builds a loyalty. Loyal customers become referral customers. And so that's another way that you are going to build your brand and get new customers as well.
And that's that I was touching on my next question, actually. Like, do you think there's a competitive advantage for small businesses that are out there and are telling stories and engaging with their target customers?
Right. Absolutely. So the advantage with telling a good story and connecting with your audience is that good stories get shared. We all love to retell a good story. That's why some stories have lasted for, centuries, millennia. They get retold because they're good stories, and we care about the characters in them. So this is how, when stories get shared, this is how you generate new traffic, and this is how you onboard new customers. So people enjoy something, they share that content. So one of the important things, and Michelle spoke to this in terms of transactional storytelling, is to remember that your customer is the hero of the story, and your brand or service should be playing a supporting role in that story. It should show that customer how it's going to improve their life, how it's going to play a part in their life. If it's just something transactional, just information, they're not going to care about it that much. And I do have to make this last point, because Nathan will kill me if I don't mention HubSpot inbound marketing at some point in this webinar. But when customers are searching for information, they're not necessarily looking for, your product, a service. They want to find the information, and if you're the one to give them that information and do it in a way that they enjoy, they are far more likely to buy from you.
Yeah.
So that's what comes up, the concept of sort of inbound marketing. So be the one that gives them the information they want, the story they want, and they will be your customer.
Thank you. Now, Abby and Jürgen, both as digital content producers, you've been run off your feet over the last 18 months because people have recognised just the need to stay relevant, and social media and the digital footprint was a big part of that. But Michelle, more broadly speaking, do you think businesses have had the time to reflect and pay a lot of attention to, I suppose, establishing their brand strategy and how they want to move forward?
I think a lot of organisations are just trying to get through tomorrow, which is absolutely understood. But the point that I always make is that you are always achieving your brand every single day. You are doing stuff that either contributes to it or erodes it. Every person in your organization, and I don't care what their role is contributing or eroding. And so if you're thinking about brand just as a what that you do, you're actually undercooking it. You're missing the opportunity. The opportunity is that it is everything you do. Everything you do. There is no part of your business that can't actually contribute to, I call it the unheroic work. Right. And so the whole idea of strategy for me is, I actually think, with apologies to all those who do that work, I don't necessarily think brand should ever be thought about as a strategy. It's not. It's actually a result of all of the other strategies that you have as a business. You probably don't need another one. And it's really this built on the foundations of what do you care about? What do you believe? Right. So what, as an organization, what are those things that drive you, and how do you do things? And then translating that into every actual nook and cranny of your business and your organization, and then doing that on repeat. So we spend a lot of time talking about stories out in the market and to the customer, but that's missing a huge, big chunk of the importance of storytelling, which is actually the stories that we tell ourselves inside that actually help us become a consistent and dependable organization, because that's what people come back for. The hero stuff gets all the press, like I call it the shiny objects, but it's actually this array of everyday actions done well over and over again that people come to depend on, that really build this strong and sort of enduring, what I call brand result. I think that's the story that doesn't get told enough, right? The guy who keeps the shelves stocked, the person who answers the phone with a smile, that everyday unheroic work where the business end, if you like, of a brand happens.
I love that. And all those little cues that go into brand building. For example, I think we're all going to leave this webinar thinking that Jürgen is a cyclist to note from his background there. He's paid particular attention on his personal brand there. So there's some of the great tips, Michelle, but what do you think are some of the common mistakes people make with brand building?
Being too aspirational is the number one thing that I see that organizations do wrong. And what I mean by that, because again, come back to this idea that brand is a result of the promises you keep, right? So to keep a promise, you've got to make a promise you can keep in the first place. So if I'm sitting there going, oh, we can jump through hoops and do the washing and hang it out all in one thing, we don't have to show you how we're going to do that. We're just going to set this big story that you buy into. And then my experience of that, and when I actually interact with that organization, when I buy what you're selling and it doesn't meet the hype, it's a really big problem. When I'm hiring a staff member or a teammate and they buy into this stuff that we say we care about, that is how we do things, and then they get there and it's not, and nothing even close to that, it's so damaging. And so organizations waste so much resources, they like time, money, effort, all of it, by being unduly aspirational. And that's not an encouragement to have low standards by any means. It's just saying that you've got to actually be a bit brutal with yourself about what can we do.
Now, Jürgen, thank you, Michelle. Jürgen, getting back to you, because I am fascinated by podcasts actually, and if you could tell.
I was going to tell you a story though.
We would never have guessed.
No. But I love, Jürgen, I know you've had great success in getting some terrific people into a number of podcast series of your own. Do you find that people in the current environment are more accessible and more pleased to be able to go online and impart their story to people they don't really know?
That's a hard question to answer. I mean, certainly people have more time these days to go online and have conversations. However, I think it's really important, and I've worked really hard, and this is part of the whole branding thing, of building a connection with the people before I bring them on. So I build a connection with them. I get to know them in some way by commenting on their blog posts, by commenting on their social media posts, and starting a conversation. If they respond to what I've posted, then I'll respond to that. And then I can invite them on a quick call. And I have found that those quick calls are probably easier to facilitate today because people have more time. But that quick call then quickly establishes A, whether we like one another and get on, and B, whether they're a fit for my audience. So that's part of my branding. I want somebody to come on to speak to certain subjects that I cover and to provide value to my audience. So I make that really clear in that conversation, and that's when we bring people on. So again, it's more about building that relationship up front, which is part of my brand and part of what both Michelle and Abby have talked about before in terms of being human, being caring about the other person's success and caring about my audience for the podcast, rather than just a simple transaction of, hey, come on my podcast. Yeah. And Abby, before we finish up, I do want to ask you,
do you have some really practical tips for small businesses? What are the top 3 tips they should go away and consider today as a starting point to start their brand narrative and to tell their story?
Essentially, I can drill it down into a few easy rules. I mean, you can really go on forever when it comes to storytelling and good practices, but just a few things to ask yourself when you're creating your brand messaging and you're building these narratives is: will my customer enjoy this? Does this align with my brand values? And do you enjoy it? Because if you're not enjoying what you're reading or what you're putting out there, or you're not proud of it, then you can't expect your customers to either.
Yep.
So if you ask yourself those 3 questions before you're putting up any kind of brand messaging or content, make sure you answer yes to all of those questions.
I think I need to review those questions myself from time to time. But certainly my staff do a terrific job. And moving forward, storytelling's not going away. It's been with us for generations and centuries and millennium. But what's next in the world of storytelling, do you think, Abby? What's something that's really nifty that people are onto?
This is something I think local businesses perhaps don't have the budget for this, but customized video content is now becoming a thing. And I can't stress this enough, Ben. There's 3 magic words: video, video, video. So, I mean, obviously more brands are doing it now, but it is the stats, look them up, please. Viewers retain roughly 95% more of a message when they watch it compared to reading it. And social videos generate 1,200% more shares than text and image combined. So if you're not doing video content, start today. Do a 5-second video. They don't have to be high quality productions that cost a bomb. Anyone with a smartphone can make a good brand video. And even if they are a bit clumsy, even if they're sort of warts and all, for a lot of brands, people appreciate that transparency. It comes back to what we talked about before, that humanity, that reality, that, the fact that there's real people, behind what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that would be my advice moving forward. It's going to be more video, more audio, the rise, just non-stop popularity of platforms like TikTok and Instagram Reels. So we want easy to make, easy to watch short form videos. They're just becoming more and more popular. There's just no slowing them down. And as Jürgen talked to, more audio as well. So even start thinking about, how your brand is going to tackle the audio side and jump into the world of podcasting.
And Michelle, would you back that up? Would you put your bet on video to be growing exponentially over the coming years?
I am not the person to ask that question. I don't do tactical stuff, but I think that the tip that I'd make for people, I'd give people a thing to think about always, right, is internal becomes external in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. So I don't care what you're saying in the marketplace. If it's not aligned to who you are as an organization and how you do things, you are wasting your money. You're actually going to create a gap that is going to be hard to recover from. So before you go rushing into anything, basically just have a think about that aspect of it, as like, how does this reflect who we are and how we do things around here? Because that's the most important thing for any kind of return on investment that you might put into that stuff.
Fantastic. Now, Jürgen, last question, ladies and gentlemen, because our time is up. As I said, it does go very quickly, but Jürgen, you're known to be an innovative man. Tell us what's next in storytelling beyond podcasts. What's the next big thing around the corner?
Well, I would endorse what Abby said about video, and I'd also emphasize that Michelle makes a really important point, and that's about being authentic and being true to your own beliefs, your own culture, your own values. I think being seen on camera, meeting in person, is still the number one thing to build a connection and build a relationship with somebody and take that journey further. And of course, you can tell stories in person. The next best thing is on video, because people can see you, they can see your facial expressions, they can see your, they can assess whether your body language is congruent with the words you're saying. And so, are you authentic and do I like you? And of course, with podcasting, you can do video in a podcast and then use the audio component where people can just listen to the audio component because it's much more convenient. They can listen while they're driving or while they're commuting. And the video can be up on the social media channels where people can see it. So there's the two components you have of that. So I think the video is a big thing because in this day and age, first of all, we're learning that with all these lockdowns that we can actually connect with people almost as if we're in person through the use of video like we do on Zoom. And also it's removed the geographic boundaries that we had in place before. So, on my podcast, for example, I talk to people all around the world. It's just amazing that you can just jump online, get on a video call and build those relationships. And that opens up a whole new marketplace. There's 6 or 7 billion people in the world, and there's probably hundreds of thousands out there that are looking for exactly what you have to offer.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, digital content is here to stay, but I think we can all agree that we can't wait to get back and be in front of each other face to face telling our stories. So thank you everybody for joining me today. For those who have joined us, I'd like to give a special thank you to our guest, Abby Jane from Pixel. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Michelle Hogan from Michelle Hogan. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
And Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Thank you, Jürgen.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Abby and Michelle. It's fun.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.